Minds on Muscle community, welcome to the Fitness Pro Mentors interview series. If you want to hear some amazing interviews from amazing fitness professionals all over the world, please join our Fitness Pro Mentors private Facebook group. But today, let's make it rain. Minds on Muscle community, Strata community, welcome back to another interview series. I'm really excited about this. I've got someone that's a good friend, someone I look up to, someone I've heard about for longer than I've been working as a trainer, Mr. Charlie McMillin. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Let's make it rain. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that, but interesting intro there.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming. And honestly, I love that. I mean, for me, you're someone that I would say that maybe you won't say that you are, but you are a rainmaker for me because you've been doing so many things in this industry behind the scenes, helping on so many different facets. You've been a trainer, you've been a coach, you've been an educator, you've been a researcher. You are a rainmaker, a doist, as one of my good friends would say. And I'm hoping we can dig a little bit into what makes you tick, if that's okay with you.
I think that'd be fine, although there's a warning sign attached to that. So
excellent. Well, I love warning
I'll
signs,
leave
so
it.
let's see if
You
we
can
can have
figure
that
out
organically pop up. Pardon me?
Nope, that's good. I won't talk over you. Sorry about that.
So, Charlie, what I would love to do, just starting off, is, I mean, you've got really an interesting story. Like, you started off, from what I know of you, you were just an athlete, someone who loved being active and started working out. And then from there, you've transitioned all the way into trainer and all these other parts of your world. Do you mind telling a little bit of your origin story and how you got started and how you ended up to where you are today?
Oh, it was a long, long time ago at this point. So the cobwebs need to be knocked out of the way first, but I'll give it a go. Um, I mean, at the very beginning, I was in undergrad, and I was doing work study, which is kind of a form of making some money to go towards tuition um, in my latter years of undergrad. And every day I would go into the gym and tighten every dumbbell, and I would lubricate the machines and make sure that the cables, they had a bunch of old Cybex. A lot of it was Eagle, I believe, and then the rest of it was Cybex. And just made sure everything was running. And I did that. It wasn't every day. I guess it was about 3 to 4 days a week. And when you're doing a job like that, oftentimes, as you and I both know, when you're kind of working around the floor, people will ask you questions. And so I believe I helped out a few professors back then, but had, no idea in my head at the time that I would venture down the path of anything really having to do professionally with exercise. And that was about it for my exercise, if you want to call that professional experience in exercise, until years later, I lost my job and was trying to figure out what to do. And I would always do side jobs working at the gym where I worked out. And what happened, they would have a guy come in and clean the carpet once or twice a year. And one of my few skills, although you might be aware of it simply because you've seen what I have downstairs here, is moving large pieces of equipment by myself. So I would flip the room for the carpet cleaner to come in and clean the carpet. So I'd take all the equipment and move it to one side of the gym, and then I would stay there while they clean the carpet and then move it all back. You get to know pieces of equipment pretty well simply by moving them around, believe it or not. But after years of training at that gym and doing that type of stuff when I was around 28 and really had just lost my job, the membership coordinator came up to me and said, you should think about training people because everybody's always asking you questions in the gym. My training experience in terms of exercise after I was done with lacrosse, as in terms of intercollegiate competition, was predominantly aesthetic based, and but really what I was focused in on was developing and generating certain feelings. I had this weird thing about, although I probably didn't know what the name of the muscle was at the time, I was trying to generate an intense feeling of contraction or tension. I don't know why I was hung up on that for ages. And so I would do all these funky things like put, a plyo box on top of the seat on a chest fly machine, and then, get into it backwards, and then try to do, I can't remember the manufacturer of that particular machine, but I tried to get, squeeze as I was doing some version of a rear delt fly. I'd try to squeeze my rhomboids. And I was hung up on, can I generate a specific feeling in this little slice of muscle? And, people would always say, what are you doing? Like, what, like insane. Why are you doing that? It looks ridiculous. But, and when I started to explain it to him, and everything predominantly was based off of feel at that point, my mechanical knowledge was incredibly lacking. And my anatomy knowledge was not the greatest. And so it was really like, okay, I have an idea of what I need to do just based off of, my previous empirical experience of what I feel when I do it. But can I today generate a feeling there? That was what led the membership coordinator seeing me explain these types of things to members coming up to me and asking me. That was what led him to saying, you should be a trainer. And I had, up until that point, made fun of personal trainers, thinking, why would anybody pay somebody money to babysit them when they exercised? I mean, I couldn't even understand. And my roommate at the time actually was was a trainer, although he called himself a strength coach. So I took the NFPT exam, National Federation of Professional Trainers, and I started working the floor as a floor trainer. Instead of just being there to move equipment from one side to the other, I started actually working as a floor trainer for $6 an hour, and gave introductory assessments, step test, and we did a submax bike test, and then single rep max tests. And I think I was in 98. It was fall of 98. I got my first client. And my first two clients, actually. And the second of those two clients is still my client today.
That's amazing.
So, which is kind of cool. So shout out to Craig Henkin if he ever sees this. So, he's been my client now for, what is that? Goodness gracious. 23 years. There you go. So, and most of my clients are getting near the 20 mark, which is kind of interesting. But in either case, that's kind of how it started. And, that was not a lot of money even back then. And so I actually worked as a trainer at a gym called Olympus, one place called Green Spring Lifestyle Center, another gym called Olympus Gym down here. I think Olympus was a chain. And also worked at Vitamin World. And so I tried to wield 3 jobs to try to pay the bills, and really did that pretty consistently until I bagged the Vitamin World, when I started to get a couple more clients between the 2 gyms. And then the rest of the story really starts, if I would say part 2 is pretty much RTS on. So, and that's going from 2002.
That's amazing. And RTS, I would say, is where I heard about you. That's how I really learned about you, is that our late friend and my mentor, Peter, was teaching me RTS 15 years ago. And he's up in the front of the room. And for anyone who didn't know Peter, this short, tan, super jacked, charismatic guy. Like, he was this juxtaposition of this intimidating looking bodybuilder with this incredibly warm personality that somehow could tell you a terrible joke that broke all the rules of what was normally acceptable, but make you laugh and then give you a hug after. Like, he was just, he was amazing at doing that. And whenever Peter would talk and teach, I was lucky enough to hear him teach, dozens of times. Every class, he would talk about you and all the stuff that you'd learned through RTS and the way that you were exploring exercise. Like, in one particular example, I'll never forget, outside of you being a great storyteller, was he talked about you on an adduction machine in a gym. And you were doing like these, I think, 15-minute reps or something like that you were doing 1 rep with a weight and you were going really, really slow. And he made some joke, and I'm not sure if this story is true or not, but he said that somebody came up to you and asked you, hey, are you using that? and you didn't respond, and he was basically like, he's in the middle of something, and just because it didn't look like a normal rep, he wanted to know if you were on it. Anyway, I mean, I know you and I have talked. Tom Purvis's RTS program was a big part of, developing your thought process. If you mind, do you mind speaking to that a little bit about what was in that program that kind of shifted your mindset and how that is extended decades forward?
So the story goes back to 2000, I believe it was 2001. Yeah, it had to be. And I was at there's something called DCAC, and it was a convention down in DC. And the gentleman named Mike Morris was teaching his courses down there, which were the Resistobal courses. He and his wife owned a education and Swiss ball company, and he was teaching just a conference workshop. And as he was teaching the workshop, he mentioned the term moment arm, and he said, "Well, now the moment arm gets heavier here, or it gets larger here, so it's more challenging." And I had no idea what he was talking about. And so after the lecture was over, I went up to him and asked, I said, "Mr. Morris, thanks for the workshop. What is a moment arm?" And so he said, "Well, I'm glad you asked that question." He said, "I doubt most of the people in this room knew what it was, but nobody asked." And so, strangely enough, he said, "Would you like to come to our Resistobal training summit in I don't know, it was in Louisiana and somewhere, and there's a hunting cabin in Louisiana." Maybe he saw something in me just in terms of my curiosity or whatever, but I thusly became a Resistobal trainer, where I would teach workshops with Resistobal. In the process of the same conversation, after I asked him, and I said, "Okay, that's great, but what's a moment arm?" He said, "Well, the place that you really need to learn this is RTS, Resistance Training Specialist Program, and Tom Purvis." And so Lynn Alcott had an RTS book. I don't know whether you know the name Lynn Alcott, but she was involved in RTS for a while. And she was also a Resistobal master trainer. And I asked to borrow her book, and I looked at it and had absolutely no idea what any of it was. And so in terms of, it was, in this bullet point format, and kind of not a stream of consciousness, but it wasn't in a narrative format. And so I was like, okay, well, it's really, I want to know what, Tom's talking about, but I'm not getting it from this. So I called, and he and I joke about this. He still doesn't remember this, but I very, very clearly remember it. I decided that I was going to try to take the classes, and so I called up the number that was, on the inside of the manual, and he answers the phone. He swears that this didn't happen, but I will swear that it did. And I said, "Mr. Purvis, thanks for your information. I'm very interested in taking the coursework. What do I need to do to prepare?" He said, "You got a credit card?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You're in." Absolutely. And so that was in January, I think, of 2000. It was January of 2002 that phone call took place. In February, I took my first RTS science class. And I will tell you that after my first RTS science class, now there used to be a gap, but after my first, so it was, back then there was, science was the first mastery level module, and then there was a month off, and then there was, I think it was trunk and spine, then lower, then upper. I may have those mixed up in terms of trunk and lower, but in any case, after that February science class in 2002, I thought, I have no right putting a weight in somebody's hand. I have no idea what I'm doing. And I quit personal training. And I went to Guatemala for 2 weeks. And when I was in Guatemala, I had taken my science manual with me, and I was just like, I can't just quit this. I really want to understand this better, and I simply don't. And so I actually ended up signing up for the next module, which was in March, or it was in April, I think. Um, and so I went then, and I went straight through, and I'm glad I obviously did, because single biggest influence obviously on my on pretty much everything. The way that I think about exercise, um, the way that I participate in exercise, everything else. It 100% due to Tom Purvis and the resistance training specialist program, which I don't even know if it's still called that. I think it is, but or at least I think there's a part of it that's still called that. And so the biggest thing for me was really having a qualitative understanding of what Tom would have called back then exercise mechanics, and being able to manipulate the ingredients in the recipe to generate different experiences. And that was, if you recall from our conversation at the beginning of this interview, that was exactly what appealed to me about exercise. Was, how can I feel these rhomboids get so tight that they take my breath away or knock the wind out of me almost? I want them that tight when I'm doing this, exercise. And so it all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, here's how you generate the mechanical situation that gives you the best opportunity for that happening. And that was probably why RTS was of greatest significance, at least to my professional and non-professional experience in exercise.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think there's a part of my story that I'm not going to go down that road, but I want to kind of just throw in quickly in that with all of that RTS stuff, and then there was this idea that I'd learned from Peter of like the muscle activation technique jumpstart program that involved isometrics, and through all of that, there were some things I really thought I knew about the body, that I could improve range of motion and help people feel better and move better with these weird tools, a combination of exercise and motion. And when I opened this building, that all of that, both the Jumpstart program and RTS, was a big part of what my plan was to launch this program and this business, pardon me. And you really, I gotta say, like, helped me. There's a few moments in my history that people have shown me something that I'll never forget and shifted my perspective. And you gave me, like, I think 30 or 40 different papers on post-activation potentiation and just talked about it. Hey, read these things and let me know what you think, where it fits in with warming up and motion and all of this stuff. And it really completely changed my perspective. And the irony is, I mean, I'm doing these presentations and people think that I'm some sort of expert on the subject. And I'm embarrassed to say every time I do the presentation, I was introduced to all this because of you. And all of that post-activation potentiation stuff and all the connecting tissue of it, of all of these different phenomenons and papers that come with it, is really because of you. And I mean, firstly, I mean, but I don't really have a question here. I just want to say, personally and quickly, thank you so much for continuing to challenge me to be honest academically, because it helps me be better and it helps my clients. And I'm really grateful for all of that.
Well, you're welcome. It was always my intent simply just to share with people whatever I had learned. And people there's nothing better than somebody that's curious about what you're interested in. And so that to me is the most fun type of experience to engage in, because it makes you feel alive. When somebody has a passion or an interest or a curiosity about something that drives me in some way, and is open-minded, and it allows themselves to not get stuck in a rut thinking there's one thing going on here. There's one way of doing something. There's what those type of people are the people that I always want to spend my time around. And so I get as much, what I'm saying to you really is I got as much out of it by sending those papers out and by, by conversing with you about it, whether in the various means that we converse, I got as much out of it as you did. So, it was mutually beneficial in that aspect. And so thank you for being ever curious, and thank you for being one of the few, at least in my experience in the worlds that we've been in, that has really tried to maintain neutrality when it comes to a lot of different subject matter, because that's the problem, right? And when people think that there is a way, a method, a program, a pattern, of whatever, immediately when you adopt a certain bias and viewpoint, the biggest problem isn't that you have that. The biggest problem is people have a tendency to shut themselves off to any and all other possibilities. And so thank you for being a willing participant in exploration, because that's really what it is.
I love it. I love being in the water and going whatever direction the current is going and learning more and then seeing if I can challenge it. The neutrality thing I think is important, at least in my opinion, because there's so many certifications and products and machines that I'm a big fan of, like that I'm a fanboy of. But if you start waving a flag and you start going, I am a NSCA, I am a Canfit Pro PTS, whatever it is, you start getting shoved down a very narrow path that makes it tough to ask good questions sometimes, and you're going down a path with other people who are going down that same road. And so it's just like with exercise, right? We talk about, there's a bench press. Well, bench press doesn't really exist. It's just physics and physiology and a bunch of different organizations, and we give it this pre-choreographed, this name with all these different rules that go with it. Well, it's the same in my opinion, with education and certifications. Like, you go up a certification, you call it ABC certification. In my opinion, it doesn't really exist. It's just an organization of things with some new intellectual property that helps to give you a flow. And if you can take that and be creative with it, you get some really cool freedoms and liberties. I don't know. That might sound crazy, but I love it.
Well, it is. I mean, I think that it's a very important point, and it is freedom. It is not allowing yourself to get caught in a corner of your own making, where you can only see straight out in front of you. You can't see anything because you're closed in by the sides, and we do it to ourselves. I mean, it's insane when I think back, to some of the stuff that I believed in or promoted or whatever. I mean, we're all, I shouldn't say it. I was certainly guilty, as many others are. I'm continuing to learn and try to grow, and certainly exposure to more rigorous forms of academic work and science are hugely important in terms of how I've developed to realize, it's not just, I would fully embrace the idea that we knew very little, right? It's, how much we don't know. Going back to Tom, but even before that, in undergrad, I was exposed to some really wonderful professors as an English and a religious studies major, believe it or not. But part of my religious studies background is in cult study and exploration, and specifically religious cults back then, but certainly applicable to other types of cults in terms of what I learned. To have been exposed to professors that kind of enabled me to understand that oftentimes we learn much more through the process of generating good questions than we do through getting the answers. And certainly going through a dissertation phase that I'm doing right now, that's manifesting, and it is, it is really what's important. And now I understand, the Carl Rogers quotes that Purvis used to put in the manual, and it's just interesting. It's funny that I can be so far removed from a time perspective, of these things that were so influential, but I'm not that far removed mentally. So, but again, it's an interesting world that we live in, and at least professionally, and you know I'm lucky, because I can be free to think and do what I want in terms of, not just exercise, but really, creating good questions about exercise.
Well, in my humble opinion, you are one of the most successful and brilliant exercise nomads that I know, who've got a bunch of crazy things going on in the basement that I do want to talk about. But speaking of cults, there's something I do want to ask you about specifically, and it's the NBA. I have been working with trainers for a long time, educating them, which is really an honor. But so many trainers I talk to who are relatively new or have an athletic history have that kind of old school, and maybe you can dissuade or promote this, I'm not sure, but this idea that working with athletes is the top level of what we do. That if you're an exercise professional, once you make it to a sports team, you've made it, and it means X, Y, and Z, and there's fame and money that comes with that whole notion. You're someone who did that and does not do that now. And I was wondering if you could just speak to that experience and how it was for you.
Well, I was extremely lucky because I had a wonderful boss. He'd probably be annoyed if I called him that, but named Drew Cleary. And he was the head strength coach for the Wizards, and I was his assistant. And it was a very interesting time to be part of a team that, when I started there in 2008, or Tuesday, it was 2008. I was called in to work with a gentleman named Gilbert Arenas, because he was having a whole bunch of knee issues. Somehow, not exactly sure, that turned into, a slightly more entailed job there. And so I was an assistant strength coach that would work on all home games, with the players, at first. And then by the end, 13 and 14, I was going down for all home practices and home games. And it started off with me, being asked to come in because of muscle activation techniques. And my experience with the Wizards changed in terms of what I did with them, parallel with my experience with MAT. And so, although it started, from the perspective of not a lot of exercise, it really, by 2010, 2011, became pretty much all about exercise. And so it was an interesting experience. What I will tell you is, from the perspective in my original, maybe the first 2 years where it was predominantly muscle activation techniques, getting an NBA player to pay attention and not look at one of his 3 iPhones and an iPad while you're actually asking them to do certain things is a chore. It's interesting. So it is. They are not getting paid, nor should they be, to train. They are not getting paid to do any of these things. They're getting paid to play basketball, and it's something that I was lucky enough to have a great boss who reminded me of that quite often. And so, but in any case, the NBA experience was pretty cool. We had, what I found was that my level of happiness, really was based on the team, and that level of happiness was based off of wins and losses. And so when we were winning, which of course I worked for the Wizards, so there wasn't a lot of that in the beginning. But when we were winning, people were pretty happy, and when we were losing, people weren't so happy. And so, and that's understandable, right? I mean, because that is what they're getting paid for, is to win games. um, and so, you know, I appreciate that experience. um, I also appreciated a lot of the players. There are some incredibly great players, in terms of great people who play in the NBA. And, you know, some of them have left an indelible mark on me. And I'm really glad that I had the experience, you know, whether it was an hour at a time with them or a half an hour at a time with them, that I did. And, you know, they're just some great people. And the as our team, not to knock the teams of, you know, oh 08, 09, and 10, but those teams from 11 to 14, um, they were some of the nicest guys that I've ever worked with. And so that's wonderful. Now, as far as I did okay financially for a part-time guy that was going down there. Um, and I did get the experience of traveling, you know, when we got to the playoffs, and which of course wasn't very often. But that was pretty cool to, you know, there are certainly some things that are amazing. Standing, you know, right before tip time on the United Center floor is wild, right? This is where Michael Jordan played. You know, I grew up, you know, I wasn't a huge basketball person, but I love to watch Michael Jordan. So to see all the fanfare and all that stuff, even though, you know, we're well past Jordan's playing days, that's pretty amazing. And that was cool. I mean, I absolutely appreciate all that. I will tell you, though, that the strength coach is not the person that makes a lot of money on professional sports teams usually. And this may have changed. My last, you know, stint was in 2014. So I don't know how it is now. I can't speak to any. All I can speak is what I knew then, which wasn't much. But it's not exactly, you know, you're not going to, just like anything else about this profession, I hate to tell people this, but you're not going to be, you know, a gazillionaire working in exercise. It's not going to happen. So, you know, in any case, that it was fine, and it was worth the experience. I learned it was worth the experience because of the change in mindset that I had, because I started realizing how similar NBA players were to my clients, for instance, that were not NBA players. And the idea that really was so strong that I started to learn was, don't ever do anything to or with a player in terms of training that could ever get in the way of them going out on the court and playing. What I saw a lot when I was playing lacrosse through college, and then when I coached lacrosse, and which was just after college, and then, you know, over the years, what I would see is that there are a lot of people running around who work in our field that think that they're going to, you know, come up with some way to improve, you know, an athlete. Okay, you know, if they're not, you know, a professional, I don't know anything about the college strength conditioning world. What I can tell you is you're not going to improve. No strength coach is going to improve an NBA player. They're already the greatest thing that ever walked the earth. You're not going to. All you can do is not get in their way. So really, that's what I spent my time doing, was making sure I was not getting in the way of these players. And so if it was Nene, who just wanted to do a bodybuilding-ish workout, that's what Nene got, right? If Marcin Gortat wanted to do, you know, certain exercises heavy, I had to kind of back him off a little bit. But, you know, it was all about supporting and accommodating them. And no, that really was one of the surest examples of this notion of participating at a low to moderate level of intensity or effort. I'm going to use that term because I don't love the term intensity. But that low to moderate and the benefits of that type of participation. And because one of the greatest things that you can do for a client is the same as what you can do for an NBA player, is always participate with them or have them participate at a level that will never get in the way of their own participation. Right? And a lot of this comes from Tom Purvis, and you can't do more than you can do. So this notion of trying to overload, even the term overload is suspect in a lot of ways, right? What do you mean it's over? Over what? You know, so is it over the load you did before, or is it overload in terms of what you can handle? I don't know that people really have a clear working definition of what that is, at least operationally. Maybe some of them do. I certainly didn't. And so this idea of, you know, we're always working, training, our level of participation is always less than the max, right? You remember this from teaching RTS yourself, probably, right? You can't do more than you can do. You're always doing some version of less, or a maximum, a single rep maximum, or whatever, you know, some version of that. So the question became at an early time for me in the NBA, and then, you know, adopted really quickly with clients, and I'll share that with the Lyme disease, was how far away from maximum can we participate and still advance or progress, right? For lack of a better way of describing this right now, if we take percentages of maximal voluntary contractions or percentages of 1 rep maxes, can we still improve, you know, at 30%, you know, 1 rep max? How far away, you know, what is the minimum amount? Because the coolest thing is that if we can identify what the minimum is, that is the least likely to jeopardize or increase the risk, or whatever you want to call it, of the person being unable to come in the next day. So my goal is always that a client should walk out not just thinking, boy, you know, that was great, I really enjoyed that session, but I want to do this again tomorrow. Not 2 days from now, not 3 days from now, tomorrow. Arthur Jones, for all his amazing ideas and machinery and all this other great stuff, you know, you had to take a day off. You know, that was important. He was heavy on the rest, right? So, you know, 3 days a week, day off in between, whatever. You know, it was not, you know, every day. I want my clients to want to work out every day. And most of my clients do, every single day. Which, if you're talking about business, is a pretty good business model. It also allows me to shape experiences for them. So a lot of that came from the having to adopt this idea, and getting rid of all the nonsense that may have been in my head before that of, oh, I'm going to improve this professional athlete. I'm going to train them in a way that's going to make them better. They were drafted. They're already amazing. So, you know, I'm a risk averse, as Mac would call himself. I'm a risk averse type of trainer, and my goal is to seek to create the most enjoyable exercise experiences possible. Because if I can achieve that, then I can have sub goals underneath of that, which are, okay, maybe we want to get a little bit stronger. Maybe we want to get a little bit leaner, whatever. But there's a more acute goal. When I say acute, I mean of during the exercise or right after the exercise, of, I like that. I enjoyed that. That's potent, right? For somebody having that experience, not just for my clients, but for me, you know. It's why I get on and I do a 15-minute seated adduction. Oh, wow, that was really wild. 7.5 minutes in, you're just like, what is going on? This is the coolest thing ever, right? Even when the person comes up and says, are you still using that? It's like, yeah, the weight's elevated 4 inches off of the weight stack. It's just not moving very fast.
That's awesome. Hey, well, Charlie, I'll tell you what. Pardon me.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, you brought up one thing, and I'd love to go down that road, and then I think we'll put a pin in that today. But I got to get you on a second time because I got a whole pile of awesome questions, and we'll have to do this again as long as you're okay with that. Maybe sometime later this summer.
Oh yeah.
You brought up the Lyme stuff, and I know that through that you've developed something that you've been using that you've shared with me. You came here to Strata and you presented it, which I'm really honored for, and that's the PEC scale. And you referred to, with your clients, what is the least amount of stimulus is required to get the adaptations they want, but also the experience. Would love for you to talk about that if you're open to it.
All right, so and I'll do this. What's our time frame here, so I can make.
Don't worry about it. You go, and we'll button it up at the end.
All right, so in 2011, and I will tell you, just make sure if you go outside, I don't know whether they're allowing you to even leave your house in Ontario right now, but if you do go outside, please check yourself for ticks. I just pulled one off that was embedded a month ago and sent it off to the lab, and it did test positive for Lyme. I had a little bullseye, so I am now dealing with my third Lyme disease experience. Hopefully I knocked it out prophylactically. But in 2011, my girlfriend at the time was basically told that she was diagnosed with Lyme disease after having a lot of physiological problems and manifestations of different things. Nobody could figure out what was going on with her. I should say we were actually broken up at the time, but I made the suggestion because of another friend of mine whose mother was a Lyme specialist, a doctor that treats predominantly Lyme disease patients, that she get tested for Lyme. Again, even though she had already been tested for it. And so she went and got tested, and her test came back positive, and it also came back positive for several co-infections. One of the big problems with Lyme disease is that these ticks are carrying multiple pathogens oftentimes, not just Borrelia burgdorferi, which is Lyme disease, but oftentimes they're carrying things like Babesia and Bartonella, and there's a slew of little nasties that these ticks are carrying. And so a lot of times people are having problems where they might be testing negative for Lyme disease, but they actually might have one of the other co-infections. And sometimes the drugs that are used to treat the Lyme disease might not treat one of the other co-infections, and so obviously you have a problem. In any case, she tested positive for Lyme disease and then 2 other co-infections, and her doctor at the time said, want you to stop exercising. And I'm thinking, she tells me this, she's like, they're telling me I can't exercise. Now, she's a physical therapist, very smart, and she's like, it sounds kind of crazy to me. And so it just so happened that I had an informational interview because I was looking into possibly applying to a university here. And I had an informational interview with an epidemiologist that was a professor there who was a trainer at one time, a guy named Chris D'Adamo. And we were talking, and we pulled up some guidelines from 2000 that were written in 2008. They were the Lyme disease guidelines for treatment. It was written by a doctor who had an affiliation with the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. And the language in the document kind of, and this is, excuse if there is some slight inaccuracy, but generally the theme was you should exercise vigorously, but don't go too hard. And so a patient, when hearing that, is left with, I don't understand what that means. Okay? And so when I was talking to Dr. D'Adamo about this in this informational interview, he said, well, surely they've done some research on this and they know what happens. Well, in this actual document of guidelines, it specifically states, well, we think exercise is good because the additional increase in terms of oxygenation due to exercise might kill off the bacteria, and perhaps a slight increase in body temperature might also create a die-off in bacteria. However, that die-off also could lead to certain consequences, like you might not feel well. One of the things that a lot of Lyme patients experience when they exercise is they get a lot of gastrointestinal distress afterwards. And so the concern is, okay, well, is this something coming from the die-off in bacteria? So it's great that you're exercising because that kills bacteria, but then that also might cause you to have some problems. And then, of course, what's the issue? What's the last thing in the world you really feel like doing if you're having GI distress? Going and exercising, right? So here we go, right? You may have just done something at a level that may have been too much. And so now what happens? You can't do it again. You got to take some time off until you feel better. What we were talking about before in terms of, dosing appropriately in terms of the exercise. And so when I was talking to Dr. Donamo, and he's like, there's got to be some research on this, we couldn't find anything. He's like, well, how do you feel about doing a study? And I was like, last thing I was involved with in terms of any kind of research was back in my second master's degree program, which, was 10 years earlier. And I was like, I guess. And so we ventured out and I designed a program with Tom Purvis's help. One of the issues was we wanted to be a resistance training study. To avoid the possibility of, having this die-off that might come from, increase in body temperature and increase in oxygenation and all that stuff. Resistance training might be a better option, at least certainly at first, if you're trying to avoid those types of things. And plus, I'm a bigger fan of resistance training. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy aerobic stuff, but generally speaking, I'm a bigger fan of resistance training. So kind of there's my bias coming out there. And so the idea was, okay, we need to train these Lyme patients in a way that won't make them sick. Is this even feasible to do resistance training? And how can we design a way to do that? And so at first I started working out torque stuff. Okay, we're going to have to figure out how to dose these people with a relative amount of torque, percentage-wise, normalized something, and use that to make sure that we ensure safety. And of course, Tom, obviously the first person to bring up, like, it's going to be impossible, right? Because you're going to have people with different segmental lengths, right? And so you get, 10 different Lyme patients on the same seated row, right? You can't, like, it doesn't matter what, at some point, like the resistance profile, you have to start talking about, okay, here's the magnitude profile from the machine, but what's it going to be once this person with these segments sits down and it's all over the place? He said, really, the answer is to come up with a perceived exertion scale. He said, but the stuff that's out there is going to be a problem. Whether it's the modified Borg or whether it's the Omni, if you ask somebody on a 10-point scale, are you a 1 or a 2 on a 10-point scale, that gets a little tough to discern. And when it comes to RPE scales, what this is considered is the difference between coarse and fine in terms of the grading of the scale. And so a finer tuned scale might give you pretty good information. But when you're talking about looking at the very, very low end of effort, it's very difficult to discern between the grades on a 10-point scale. And so Tom suggested what would be smart is to have something that's coarser. So we came up with a 5-point scale. And then he said, 5 works well because to have a clear, defined midpoint would be important because people understand what's half of something, right? And so came up with the 5-point scale, and then I came up with the levels of effort. And so this is actually, changed a little bit since the, where is my camera? There we go. Okay, that's weird. It does it wild. It's kind of flippy. And so these levels that I designed, this is an interesting scale because this is a little different than the way that most RPE scales are designed. This scale is to be used with selectorized equipment. That's important, number one. Okay, and I'm validating it under these circumstances. So with selectorized equipment, and it is an inter-rep RPE scale, meaning what the person is doing is providing a momentary and predicted rating of their exertion, meaning after they perform a repetition, they don't let go of, like if we're talking about a seated row, they don't let go of the weight, but they unload it so that they can tell you where they are on this 5-point scale. And the way that the scale is designed, for instance, level 1 is very low effort. I can continue with repetitions forever. So after having done a rep, they unload it and say, I can do that forever. Okay. In order to validate that, that is going to be typically the lowest weight selection available on any selectorized machine. Okay. We hopefully some machines are a little screwy with that, and so there's certain people that we'll see. Level 2 is I can continue with another repetition with no strain. So it's not something I can do forever, but there's no strain involved in this. Level 3 is I can continue with another repetition with some strain. Okay, so the difference being none and some. Level 4 is I can continue with another repetition with significant strain, and level 5 is I cannot continue with another repetition. For the Lyme study, okay, after designing this, we chose 5 exercises. It was a seated row. It was a seated chest press. It was a standing calf raise, which was a bad choice, simply because increasing the load on body weight. We should have done the calf raise in a leg press. It was a bad choice. A crunch, another bad choice, because for a lot of people, their body weight was already exceeding the level that, it was at the level we wanted them to participate, but they were done. And then a leg press. So chest press, seated row, calf raise, crunch, and leg press. And it was, we ran the study and collected all the data in 2012, and then were published in 2015 in ACSM's Medicine and Science and Sport and Exercise. And if you guys, it's open access, anybody can read it and grab it. It's on there. And so it was really an interesting study. And what we did, excuse me, we kept everybody at a level 2. In other words, they participated throughout the whole study, okay, except for the familiarization phase trial. They participated at a level 2, and when they reported, when they reported a level 3, that's when we stopped them. Okay, so they would do, during the familiarization trial, we would kind of see what their level 1 was, and then when they reported a level 2, we'd stop them. So now we knew what their level 2 was, okay, and we knew what their level 1 was, and then so we would actually be able to come in the next time around and throughout the rest of the study, participate at level 2, which is I can complete another repetition with no strain. So they were participating in this range of there's no strain involved with this exercise. When they said, okay, I can do another one, but there's going to be some strain, that was it. Now, for these Lyme patients, the purpose of that was to keep them in it. What was strange and what we did not expect, and the whole goal is a feasibility study. We're just trying to keep people participating and not get sick from the exercise. And what strangely happened was that gross volume, although not the greatest indicator of progression, but gross volume, it required more. What I think I cut it at was 10. When they were able to achieve 10 repetitions before reporting a level 3, the next time they came in, we would end up increasing the weight by 5 pounds. So what happened across the board with people was it kept taking more and more load, so that by the end of the study, some people, the load that would elicit a level 2 response for a number of reps before reporting level 3 was like double what it started, which was really, really cool. So some version of progression in terms of what they perceived as their effort relative to the load that they were using in the exercise. And so that was wild but cool. And again, the goal was feasibility. So it was not anything else besides that. So we showed that it was feasible for Lyme patients to participate in this way. And the hope was, of course, that the University of Maryland was obviously signed on it, because the goal was, okay, can we give this study for docs who work with a lot of Lyme patients to read, and perhaps even give them the scale, the PECs, and have them give it to their patients so that they can take it home and say, look, these guys showed that as long as you participate at this level 2, you're going to be okay. You're not going to end up having to stop participating because of it. So what has happened since then was the University of Maryland we've basically set up another study with a cohort of cancer patients. This first cohort are prostate cancer patients, and they wanted to use the same design. And they're undergoing proton therapy and androgen deprivation therapy. And the study is open now. Now that kind of the COVID stuff is out of the way. And we're going to start working with people soon. And so it's the same 5 exercises, except this time I actually got a VR. I don't know which VR it is, but it's screwy now that Life has acquired Cybex, but it's the crunch, that abdominal machine that I don't remember. I think VR2, VR3, VR1. I don't know. And so the PEC scale goes on. I am validating it as part of my dissertation, or attempting to validate it. We'll see what happens. And so that's kind of cool. So that's the nuts and bolts of the PEC scale. So, and I use it with all of my clients. So that's another added thing, which was, now most of my clients are participating in level 3 and stopping when they hit a level 4. So they're participating in a moderate effort, which is I can continue with another revision with some strain, and they stop, most of them, at I can continue with another repetition with significant strain.
Amazing.
So that is, I am a strong advocate for moderate exercise participation, and I'm very aware that might not be what a lot of people out there are suggesting in terms of health behaviors. They might be suggesting higher levels of effort, and that's okay. I mean, that's a discussion for another time. But the key for me is continued participation, first and foremost, above everything else. Not getting in the way of a client or an NBA player's life or play, or I don't ever want anything that we're doing to augment their life, to create a barrier or an obstacle in any way to whatever it is that they're doing. And one of the main things might be coming back in tomorrow.
Dude,
is that enough on the PEC scale?
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And honestly, this is where I'm not going to say no for an answer. You got to come back on and we're going to talk more, because there's a bunch of questions about that stuff and your clients and the way you do everything that I think people could really benefit from. For today, I'd love to put a pin in it, but I have to say one thing to close out is, honestly, I mean, I don't know if anyone says this to you, but thank you so much for everything you do to help professionals and other people, like Lyme patients, and in this case now working towards cancer patients, keeping people involved with exercise. I mean, I know you mentioned that you love sharing information and helping people see the other side of the coin, and you get out of it, like with me sharing information, you get stuff out of it. I mean, it's clear that as much as you're an academic and you continue to explore and challenge yourself, you also dispense and share that. You're not holding it in, you're comfortable and open, and because of that, not self that lack of self-serving behavior, everyone else benefits from it. So maybe it's cheesy, but thank you.
Well, and I want to just say that, and to put a cap on this, and I appreciate that, and again, you're welcome. It's mutually beneficial, obviously, and in all of these things, it is, whether it's working with Lyme patients, right? Having seen people that come in that struggle walking in and have a PICC line in their arm, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. What I will say, though, is that what this dissertation and then what my previous experiences have done in a lot of ways is made me see, we talked about, you and I have had long conversations about manual muscle testing, and that the origins of manual muscle testing with, Robert Lovett and Wilhelmine Wright predominantly, and then the Kendalls, wonderful, amazing physical therapists. This is all coming out of polio, and the Kendalls working with these polio patients, but basically taking all of Wilhelmine Wright's tests and kind of putting them, not modifying them a whole lot, and then putting them into their own book. It gets published in 1949. And then you got George Goodhart coming along and literally copying all of Kendall and Kendall's tests and putting in his applied kinesiology book, and making it look like he's the creator of these things. And then this goes on and keeps getting repeated by various people. And what I find is that the minute people let their ego get in the way and thinking that they're, that they're either the provenance of the information lies with them, or their origins of something is with them, then they start becoming protective and defensive, and they want to just, close ranks and say, well, this is my knowledge, and if you want it, you have to pay for it, or what. It's insane, because what you realize is this stuff has been around if anybody is watching this and they're interested, go look up D.A. Sargent. Go look up, I don't remember Xander's first name, but go look up the Xander machines. And Dudley Allen Sargent is, when I say D.A., so Dudley Allen Sargent, who's considered kind of the father of phys ed in this country. Just do yourself a favor and look these people up. Look up Wilhelmine Wright and Robert Lovett. When you start to see that what the internet has allowed us to do is to see that this information was out there, the problem was it wasn't accessible. And so people, throughout decade after decade, claiming that they've come up with some original idea was just repetition of what somebody else had come up with way earlier. And so there's no sense in holding it all to yourself, because even if you think it is a unique idea and you came up with it, I'm pretty sure somebody else did it before you. We just didn't know about it because the internet didn't exist then. But now that we do have the internet and we have the ability to order a 200-year-old book, through a Libris or a Books or whatever, and you read it and you go, oh my gosh. And I give Gary Gray credit. He always used to say there's nothing new under the sun, right? Now I understand why he was always saying that. But the point is that knowledge is not meant to be held and by one person. And knowledge is not meant to be, especially if it's about any type of information and knowledge that can promote public health in any way, it's a crime to keep that and charge people money for it. If you think you actually have something that is able to help that many people, you need to share it and make it free and expose it to scientific scrutiny before you do that, hopefully. but it will be if it's that available. We'll be taking a look at it. But the point is that I've learned throughout a lot of different experiences that the information's not yours. And if it's that strong and powerful, it really should be shared with everybody. So
couldn't agree
there's
more.
no sense. And I want, and especially if it helps people, my goodness gracious, if this can help somebody get, almost every one of my clients has issues, right? This has allowed them to participate. Stuff like this. If it can allow somebody watching this video, if anybody wants this, I can share it. You can contact Brandon. You can contact me. I'll get you a copy of it, and I explain it to you personally if you want to explain that way. But and you can use it however you want to use it. It's free, right? So, yeah.
Dude, thank you so much for your time. I love it. And honestly, as everyone knows, I got a baby coming. As soon as the baby comes, we're going to set a date and we'll do a round 2 of this.
Sounds good to me, man.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
We didn't even get to the equipment, did we?
I know, that's right here. That's the next question. We're doing it next time.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I'll have my hair cut by then, so I don't have this ridiculous
I don't think so.
stuff.
You should grow it and keep it going.
It's awful, man. Now I understand all those years of, like it stays wet all the time, and it's really frustrating.
Listen, mine's balding and disappearing, so what you got going on is looking pretty good, and I'm jealous. All right, dude.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, man.